Welcome to the Doing Life Together podcast, brought to you by Arch Impact Studios. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Owen.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Evan.
I'm Dan.
That's right. We got a guest today. We're really excited because in this episode, we're going to talk about leadership. We think this topic is important because we all encounter leadership interactions in our life. Pretty much starts the day you're born, child to parent, and then it just changes and evolves throughout your life. So you'll have coaches, teachers, bosses. Some people might refer to their spouse as a boss. But what we want to get across is a leadership interaction is a form of a relationship, right? And relationships have dynamics, and these dynamics shift due to a variety of factors, including the life experiences of those people involved, their expectations, their needs, and the role that each person plays in that interaction. So there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that generations play an impact in what people expect in those leadership interactions, and that currently there's been a disruption in that expectation versus reality. And so we agree with that there's been a disruption. And so we're going to spend time in this episode talking about some differences in expectations and the importance of finding common ground between the generations. The outline for this week is we're going to start with who the heck is Dan and why is he here? So we'll get to that here in a second. Then we're going to have our random question. We're going to talk about some experiences we've each had as either leaders or being led. We'll talk through the survey. We did a survey. We had dozens of people reply, and so we're going to talk through some of the results of that survey. And then, of course, we're going to end with some key points. Just want to remind you that always, these are just our perspectives. This isn't us dictating to you a specific way to live or go about your life. This is just the way we've done life. So we encourage you to listen, pick out what you think is going to work for you, and then go out there and live your best life. All right, Eli, you know what time it is, buddy.
What is on your bucket list this year?
Ooh, bucket list this year. All right. Does anyone have a bucket list item they're planning on crossing off this year or have already?
I will be going to Italy this summer with some friends. So that'll be like I've been to Canada, I guess, but this will be like my first real time, like actually leaving the United States.
Nice. That's a good one.
My bucket list item this year, Panama Canal.
My bucket list item is that I'm going to celebrate 20 years of marriage. And I consider each decade that I've been married to be a step forward on the bucket list. So I'm really excited about that.
I think something on my bucket list is after my baseball season ends to get play some golf and get good at golf. So something I want to do.
My bucket list is probably to catch a fish in South Carolina because we're going there this summer.
And somehow, as many times as you've gone there, you very rarely catch a fish.
I caught one time, though.
Like we said, this episode is all about leadership. And there is a perception that the current approach to leadership isn't working so well anymore. And that perception is also being seen in the fact that there's this wedge that seems to be driven in corporate America between those who are leading and those that are being led. The reason that this matters, right, is that it's causing decreased levels of trust between organizations and their workers. The workers are becoming less engaged, and less engaged workers are less productive, and they tend to be more likely to switch jobs and go other places, and it's just causing a pretty significant disruption. There's lots of root causes depending on what you read, but there does seem to be this theme, and a lot of it that it's around generational differences. And when we say generations, what I want you to think about is this. So the builder generation, are anyone born between 1929 and 1945, right? Then there is the boomers between 1946 and 1964. We're going to talk about Gen X as being anyone from 1965 to 1982, millennials 1983 to the year 2000, and Gen Z being anyone 2001 to 2015. So when we talk about generations today, that's really what we're talking about. And what we're not going to do in this episode is validate whether or not generational gaps exist or why those are. That'd be a great additional episode. But today we're just going to operate under some assumptions. One is that there is a gap in expectations between leaders and employees, that this gap is in fact hurting companies and society, and that we do believe that life experiences impact expectations and that different generations have different life experiences. So it's very reasonable to assume that generations might view or have different leadership expectations, and that this is worth talking about because in society, when people and companies are more productive, society tends to be thriving. And when either of those two groups is not thriving individually, either people or companies, society tends to be equally not thriving, I guess is one way to put it. All right. So the question is, who is Dan? So Dan?
Yeah, I assume I need to answer that question, right?
Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody why we would invite Dan to a conversation about leadership?
Well, I've been almost a lifetime student of leadership, which has led me, and I say since 1971, when I went to Princeton, not Princeton University, but the Corporate Education Center for the company I worked with, and started conducting and developing training on how to be better leaders. And since that time, I've had a lot of experiences, and my opinion about leadership and my experiences about leadership kind of bring me to a point where I'm just anxious to keep right on learning, but I've got some things to share. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to do that here.
So we're really excited. Dan, as he was saying, has been doing leadership for a long time. As we'll find out throughout the episode, he's probably being a little humble, but he has taught leadership in a number of different settings, and we'll get more details on that. But as we were thinking about leadership, former leadership consultant seems like the right guy to invite to a conversation about leadership. Plus, he gives us a whole nother generational view. We're not going to talk about what generation he's from. But if he's been studying leadership since 1971, you can probably get a general ballpark idea. All right. Does anyone else want to admit some of their examples of leadership that they've experienced?
I mean, I have nowhere near the amount of experience as Dan, but I was captain of my soccer and volleyball teams in high school, and I was a counselor at a summer camp for the past couple of years. I'd say those were probably my main leadership examples.
Yeah, very similar stuff for me. Captain of my club soccer team for a while, and counselor at a camp.
For me, I haven't been a captain of any of my teams, but I've definitely played a role as a leader. And then I also was a counselor at summer camp for the past couple of years.
All right. And then myself. So I've been in what they call professional leadership for about 12 years. A couple different Fortune top 20 companies. So that's pretty good. I've even risen to the level of senior executive, which is pretty funny, in my opinion, because I'm not a typical executive type person. And then, of course, I've coached youth sports at various levels, and I coach and mentor people who are looking to become leaders. So I've got a little bit of experience, and I'm excited to talk about a topic like this because leadership is one of my two biggest passion areas. So I want to talk about a lot of what we're going to discuss today is coming from a survey we conducted. So we conducted a survey. We got dozens of responses. Thank you to everyone who took the time to share their opinions of leadership with us. And as we talk, we broke the leadership survey down into different categories. So we said, hey, if you're someone who's under the age of 14, what are your current opinions and experiences? If you're 15 to 18, that was our second age group 18 to 25. So those are those people leaving high school, starting careers probably, and then 25 to 40. So those are as we talk about the survey data, everybody who responded falls into one of those four categories. I will give you kind of a disclaimer. It wasn't wildly different than anything you'd find online. So if you go Google leadership by generation, and you look at those age groups, a lot of what we found was very similar, which was reassuring, right? But also scary. So I say that to say our sample size might not be thousands, but we feel good about directionally. But we did get some really, really good individual comments that we're going to cover today. So question number one that we want to talk about is, how do you define the key roles of leadership? So I'm going to share kind of my thoughts, and then I'm going to kick it over to Dan. He has a really interesting perspective that we talked about in preparing for the show that I'd really like to hear. So when I say leadership, I think of 4 elements. This is when I tell people, I'm like, part one is you got to have a roadmap, right? When I talk about roadmap, it's your ability to tell people where you're headed, why you're headed that way, and then the rules around getting there safely. So here's our roadmap. Here's our plan, some people might call it. And then I talk about results. So anytime you're in a leadership position, your job is to deliver results. And so results are very important. That's about figuring out how to win today, but also in a way that you'll set yourself up to win for the future. It's a really bad leadership idea to win today for the sake of the future. It's also about measuring the right things and rewarding people and your company for that. Relationships, that's a big one I'm all about, but you got to have people are not robots. So relationships is really important. I'm big on leading the whole person. And then recharging. I think as a leader, your ability to take care of yourself is super important. You can never lead from an empty tank. You can't drive a car that doesn't have gas. You can't lead when you don't have gas. So those are the 4 things that I think about with leadership: roadmap, results, relationships, and recharge. And now, Dan, I'd really like to have you share your thoughts, because your perspective was from where leadership started was totally different, I think. And I think it really is worth sharing.
The concept of leadership has evolved. And should and needs to continue to evolve. That's why I say I'm a student of it. One of the first things I learned is it was actually in 1940 when the military needed leaders. Too many people were getting killed in World War II, sorry to say. And so they tried to find the attributes of leaders. And it developed a number of attributes that you might think of, most of them strength, command, control, in charge. And then, of course, since that research was done, it started entering the workforce. Those are the kinds of people we ought to be selecting to be leaders. So you really found a command and control. In fact, when I first started teaching leadership, the basic role of the leader was to plan, organize, direct, and control. Control being the big one. You're really in charge if you're able to tell people what to do and they do it. Over the years, it's at least a word trickled in called influence. And leaders were supposed to be able to not just say, I'll fire you if you don't do what I say, but give them some way and some reason for being there. So leadership, and I guess if you get right down to it, who's the leader? Well, it's probably the person who you work for at that point in time. So it's a supervisor. But pretty soon it gets higher and higher in the organization, and depending on where you're at. Supervisors basically motivate people and keep them going by telling them, I'll pay you this amount, which hasn't worked well over the years. And so we've evolved to the point where influence became a very important thing. And some of the things, John, that you're talking about, sincerity, being a real person, being willing to relate to people more than command people. So I think as we talk through now, we're really starting to think of people who are in charge, whether it's formally or informally, they're leaders, no matter what position they've got, that they've got people who they're trying to get the work done through. So kind of keeping that concept in mind, it became a passion for me to see if I could create through the people that I was interacting with environments that were healthy, help people grow, help people learn, help people feel even more valued, which of course has led to very successful organizations when you can get that to happen. And I've had a lot of opportunity to work with various organizations, sometimes successfully. And I'll talk a little more about that later, about why it's so difficult to help people become strong leaders.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I do think that we should clear something up. So not only is Dan a leadership guy, he's also my father-in-law and the boys' Papa Dan. So for those listening who are like, what is this? Are they pretending not to know each other? No, not at all. We will awkwardly clear the air right now. So boys, you can feel free to call him Papa Dan, because as soon as Owen said Dan, I'm like, oh, he thinks he has to do that. No, it's all right. It's all right to admit we know him. All right. So guys, so you heard kind of Papa's where he had leadership start out back in the Wayback Machine, where it was about planning, organizing, directing, and controlling, and success was having control and getting others to do what you wanted them to do. He talked about how that's not the best way and how he evolved over time. And then I talked about how my view was more about roadmap or planning, driving towards results, building those relationships, and then also taking care of yourself as a leader. So I'd just be curious, as young people with limited leadership experience, but some, what do you think of those two different versions? What stood out to you?
For me, I grew up obviously watching my dad lead, as he was like my coach and stuff like that, and just hearing him on work calls and all sorts of things. And so I certainly relate more to the having a plan and drawing out that plan for the people you're leading. And then that in turn will have them trusting you that you will get them to the right place and teach them how to do it along the way. So I think I definitely relate more to my dad's perspective, just because I've seen that growing up. But
when you hear the word control used to describe leadership, how, if someone were to say, hey, I'm here to control you, how does that feel?
Not great. I certainly don't think that's the way most people go about leading nowadays. I think there is a control aspect, but it's more controlling the situation and not the people, and just making sure that if there is any conflict, that it doesn't get out of hand. But you certainly aren't controlling the people as much nowadays, and you're just having them help you, or you help them instead of telling them what to do.
So I feel like the word control is definitely like a kind of a scary word. Kind of makes it feel like the leader wants you to do things their way, and that's the only option. But I think it's definitely getting to a point where it's more the leader just has the end goal in mind, but still kind of considers all the different options to get there and kind of take into account other people's stuff rather than just forcing them to go down the one path and get it done your way.
I think that's really interesting. Dan, just so we're all clear, that plan, organize, direct, control, like that's actually what they taught. That's not hyperbole, right?
Correct. It's the four functions of leadership. And it's really thought of and at the time as manager. Even at that point, and of course, 1971 is pretty far removed from when the leadership definition was being defined back in the military. But plan, organize, direct, and control, those are functions that really need to be done when work has to be done or anything has to be accomplished. The question is, does it always come from the leader? And there are a lot of leaders who might be good at planning, but terrible at setting up controls. And I think that one of the early things that were introduced to the leadership training at that time was something called active listening. And it became a major theme for me from the early 70s on, that the best leaders are great listeners. And that's not an easy thing to do when the challenge is on you to get things done and get them done quickly. But if you don't listen, and if you don't pay attention to the people around you, you're going to lose control. And so listening became a way that helped the leaders grow and the people that were working with them grow. So, plan, organize, direct, and control is an important process for getting things done. But a lot of cases, good leaders find out they might not be the best planners, so they call on their team to do that. And I can't help but maybe jump a little ahead, but to say, as we say, when you're a member of a team, there's no I in team. It's about we. And when it comes to leadership, where leaders go wrong most of the time is they're only thinking about me or I. And I am in charge. No, you're not. Not if you don't have a team that's working together. So that's been something that I've worked on from the early 70s on, is helping leaders understand you can get a lot more done when you're a great listener.
That's
I think
fantastic.
that kind of builds up what you guys have been saying about leaders.
Yeah, I think it's great, right? Like, I think you hit on a huge point. Plan, organize, direct, control came from the military, where it's literal life and death situation. So you need to be able to say, go this way now in this manner, because if you don't, really bad stuff can happen. There's not really time to listen, debate, discuss, review other options. And, I had forgotten, and I'm grateful for the reminder that that's where original leadership came from, because it now helps empathize with a lot of what you see, and a lot of what continues to be pushed is that mindset. And it makes a lot of sense even today in the military, but it doesn't make a lot of sense in an environment where you're trying to come up with the best idea. You're trying to move people towards a goal that's not actually life or death. So great insight there. All right, let's dive in a little bit into the leadership survey that we took. Just a reminder, so this was a multi-generational survey, 14 and under, 15 to 18, sort of that high school crowd. Then we did 18 to 25, post-high school, early career college, and then 26 to 40, kind of those early career folks. So let's think about this. Guys, open to anyone have any themes from the survey that you stood out to you or that you want to talk about?
I thought one interesting thing was that the majority of people said that they do want to be leaders in the future. So most of the people that we surveyed, I don't think anybody said no, if I remember correctly. There were a couple that said maybe in the future they'd be interested in leading, and then the majority said that they do want to be leaders in the future. I just thought that was interesting that there wasn't anybody that did not want to be a leader.
No, you're right. It was like 85% of the people said, yes, I want to be a leader. 15% said maybe, and nobody said no, absolutely not. So I'm curious, why did that stand out to you as something from the survey?
Well, I don't know. I know that there's definitely people out there that you wouldn't necessarily associate as wanting to lead, just because they are always reserved and never really put forth ideas and discussions and stuff like that. So I just thought it was interesting that we didn't have anybody that said that they didn't want to lead.
So you more looked at it from the context of, as society as a whole, we encounter people who don't seem to want to be leaders, yet in this particular survey, that didn't show up as much. But if you remember, I'm looking back at some of the data, those that said maybe was about, I'm not outgoing. I'm not sure that leadership's for me because I don't like to talk in front of people. So do you think that being outgoing is required for leadership?
I think in certain circumstances, you may need to be outgoing and willing to put yourself out there, but there's also many different places where you're already comfortable with people, such as maybe your family or a small group of friends, where you might not have to have that outgoing personality to be able to lead them. just because you're already so comfortable with them.
Yep. Awesome. Anyone else have a thought on that? Do you need to be outgoing or boisterous to be a leader?
I'd say not necessarily. You can, because you don't necessarily need to lead by like speaking and talking. You can just lead by example and setting a good example rather than speaking and stuff.
John, you and I were talking about the fact that, how do you really identify who's the leader sometimes? The question that you guys might want to think about is, do you always look to the front of the crowd to find out who's the leader? Big piece of history is Gandhi from India. He almost never was out in front. He had crowds, sometimes millions of people, who he had motivated to get things to happen. But he stayed behind. He was in the crowd, and his presence was important, but he wasn't out front leading. You can have boisterous people who are outgoing, who make good leaders, but you can also have people who say a few wise things, and next thing you know, people are asking them when they run into a barrier, what can we do? What can we do? And they are leaders. So you don't have to be outgoing and boisterous to be very, very effective as a leader.
Yeah, I would agree. In fact, one of the pieces of leadership feedback I got not growing up, I was an adult, but as I've matured into a leader was, hey, sometimes the best leaders are the ones that talk the least, right? They let everyone else talk, get their opinions out, share their thoughts, and then the leader will step in and not overstate or disagree, but they'll summarize, hey, this is what I heard. Do we all agree? So you don't always have to be the person out front who's making all the racket or answering all the questions. So that was good. So Evan, that gets back to something that you said, and I'd love your perspective. You said, although you've never been a captain on a team, you've often felt like a leader. What are some of the things that you've done sort of from that side position that made you say, yeah, I'm a leader, even though I was never officially in charge?
I feel like I always wanted what was best for the team, the best outcome. So even though I wasn't directly a leader, I still did my part in getting people to show up on time and like work hard and all the things that make a team great. And I was able to do that consistently. So that made people respect me more and like actually care what I had to say.
I like that. I think that gets back to something Dan said earlier, right? The evolution of leadership was command and control to influence. And really, Evan, what you're describing is influence behaviors, right? That whole, this is how I lead because these are the things I do. And because I do them, it's obvious that I care about the outcomes of the team and everything. And so people begin to follow suit. All right. That was good conversation there. Anyone else, any immediate themes jump out at you from the survey data?
I think I saw in there some statements about when the leader actually talks with me. It's always only to criticize or tell me what I have to do. And they weren't happy with that. And I think that the leader's role, again, is relationship oriented. And it's important that in many cases, particularly if you're new to the job or you're trying to learn, you need that conversation. You need that feedback, not criticism, but feedback to help somebody learn. And when I think of in my early days, I can go back that far. I really can. In my early days, I had teachers that I remember. I don't remember very many of them, but a teacher who loved literature and writing. She taught me a lot about that in that 1 year that I had Mrs. Love. And she was pretty strict, too. She'd hit you on the back of the knuckles if you weren't paying attention, which didn't bother me because I had a lot to learn from her. Mr. Strong was a great history teacher. he was passionate about history. And he's implanted that in me from the time I was in the 8th grade. So, we can look at teachers and say, what have I learned from them? And often, you're around a good leader because you're learning a lot. They might even be pushing you a lot, but they care about you and about what you're going to be able to accomplish. So I think that when I saw the criticisms and always speaking to me in a mean tone, that's not what we look for from a leader. What are we learning from?
No, that's absolutely great. I think back to, I think it was the episode we did on travel sports, and when you talked about some of the coaching and teammate experiences that you had, and just the negativity was one of the things that made you not enjoy the experience. So I like that we see some themes. All right. So one of the questions in the survey was around, who do you view as leaders? And there was a trend that I wanted to bring up and see what you all thought. So the trend was this: as the population got older, they stopped listing parent as a leader. So 100% of the people in the survey through the age of 17, so that under 14 and 15 to 18 bracket, said, yes, parents are leaders. Then as you got to that 18 to 25, it was 75% of them said parents are leaders. And then once you got into that post category, it was closer to 70% said, yeah, I still view my parent as a leader. I just found that curious. I don't know if anyone else did as well, but be curious. What do you think leads to that view that you stop putting your parents into that leadership bucket?
Time removed from when you were in that role of needing leadership and guidance from your parent. The farther you away from it, that's not the ones you're going to be thinking about. It's more the recency, I think, of it. But that one of the things that I've learned a good bit is we often learn our leadership style from our parents. And that leadership style might be great and it'll work for you. In many cases, it's not. And you have to make a conscious decision that says, I'm more comfortable doing this, but it's not working. I want to try something new, some new approach. And that's why we, who've made a profession out of trying to develop leaders, have found it a bit frustrating, because people will seek us out and say, help me be a better leader, but keep reverting back to what they learned when they were growing up. I'm not saying all parents are bad leaders. I think many, many of them are good. But you pick up bad habits and it's hard to break them. So as leaders, it's important to be a continuous student of leadership and listen to the people around you to find out if there are things you can improve on to make you a better leader.
Yeah, I certainly think, like Papa Dan said, the exposure to your parents obviously gets less and less the older you get. Like when you're younger, you just have so much exposure. You're around your parents almost all the time. They're the main people that you look up to most of the time and talk to. So they tend to be the people you learn the most from and therefore are your main leaders. But then as you move out, like we saw in the 18 to 25 range and the 25 to 40 range, other people such as teachers, your peers, bosses, coaches, just stuff like that, they start to take more of a focal role in teaching you and leading you, which I think is why our survey showed as you get older, your parents become less of a leader in your life.
So I heard a couple things there. I think this is important because this is the Doing Life Together podcast. And although we're talking about leadership, a big part of what we talk about is family as well. So two of the reasons, three reasons were proximity and recency. So as you move on with your life and your parents are less around all the time, you might not think of them as leaders. recency. So maybe you have other people currently in those roles, and that's who you cling to. And then the third one is maybe they just weren't a great example. And so you're pushing forward to try to forge your own way into your own identity as a leader. But as someone who is a parent and thinks it's really important that that relationship, is there anything that you think as a parent we can do to help sort of seat ourselves well as someone that our kids view as a leader as they grow up?
I think definitely kind of what we touched on earlier about not, being totally over controlling and stuff, kind of let them bring their opinions into stuff and help make decisions. And that'll definitely help them become better leader and take on some of the better leadership attributes from their parents.
Nice.
Yeah, I think having a strong relationship with your kids is probably the most important aspect, just because if you have that strong bond and relationship, then your child will value what your opinions are and will respect how you live and want to live like you. But if the relationship is just not great, or there's always fighting between the parent and child, they probably will try and look to others that they respect for that leadership view.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, guys. All right. But hey, we just want to thank everyone for listening or watching. In our next episode, we are going to cover part 2 of this leadership podcast. Until then, you can check us out on archimpacts.com for all of our episodes and helpful content. You can check us out on YouTube. We have a great YouTube channel, Arch Impact Studios, on YouTube. And remember, if you found value on what you heard here, we would love for you to like and subscribe so that you can share this with a friend. And until next time, please get out there and live your best life.